You're listening to the Allman Report on NewsTalkSTL.
Any rock lyrics, Mr. Zappa, that you have heard in the past couple of years that you wouldn't want your children listening to?
We are the world.
Well, are there any rock lyrics, Mr. Zappa, that you have heard in the past couple of years that you wouldn't want your children listening to?
We are the world.
Good old Frank Zappa. I think he was a libertarian at some point. Years ago on CNN, the late, great Frank Zappa. This is during the whole lyrics controversy, brought to us by Tipper Gore. For him to say the lyrics he doesn't want his kids listening to is "We Are the World" is absolute money. Yeah. Absolute money. Boom, boom, boom. Speaking of money, oh my Lord. That town hall with Donald Trump and Sean Hannity, there's a little bit of a gem in there you haven't heard about yet that I think you need to. I've got that for you. Ketanji Brown Jackson is suddenly a biologist. I've got that for you. Tulsi Gabbard is a badass. Revealing something really startling about her being on a terrorist watch list thanks to Kamala Harris. We've got the news media avoiding at all costs talking about Bidenomics, even when they're talking about grocery store mergers and grocery store prices. And yet another automaker is off of the EV train. It's all here on the Allman Report on News Talk STL, 104.9 and 94.1. Of course, you could see us. We're sticky all over. Somebody told me the other day they just saved it and listened to it in the morning, or saved it and listened to it in the afternoon, whatever. You can listen to the show anytime you darn well please. This is the Allman Report. All right, this town hall was great. I know you've heard a ton about it already, so I don't want to belabor it, but there was something in this town hall that I thought was great that only Donald Trump could possibly pull off. And that is the introduction of a brand new targeted voting block that I didn't even think of. But of course, President Trump did.
You have 500,000 jobs. Think of that. It's your biggest business. And you get a big majority of your income from fracking. And you have somebody that's not going to allow fracking. She's not going to allow it. You can't take the chance. You have no choice. You've got to vote for me. You've got to vote for me. You got to.
Stick with it.
Even if you don't like me. Yeah. It's no, but even if you don't like me, you can sit there and say, I can't stand that guy, but there's no way I'm going to vote for her. No, you have to have fracking.
So President Trump has a brand new, first it was, black voters. He's been reaching out to them. Hispanic voters, he's been reaching out to them. Suburban women, he's been reaching out to them. And now he's reaching out to a whole new crew of people, and that would be people who don't like him. Perfect. In fact, people who hate him, as he pointed out. Because here are the calculations in that dynamic of reaching out to people who don't like you. Because at that point, you have to challenge them and say to them, all right, you're telling me that you dislike me so much that you're ultimately going to take a vote that's going to make your life miserable. Economically, when it comes to your safety, when it comes to engaging in unnecessary foreign wars, when it comes to the sanctity of our schools, and even our neighborhoods for that matter, when it comes to fighting crime. You're telling me, says Donald Trump to these people who don't like him, that you don't like me so much that you're actually going to get to a situation where your vote is going to make you dislike yourself. That's the calculation. And it's brilliant, and it's true. There are people out there who are basically committing electoral suicide by deciding they're going to go ahead and vote for Kamala Harris no matter what the situation. Even if it means somehow, some way that it's going to damage their lives. They have to know it. They have to see it. They're seeing it already with the Biden-Harris administration that Harris cannot extricate herself from, even though she keeps on acting like she just fell from a spaceship. The reality is she is an incumbent, and she is part of the Biden administration. So she can't take herself away from that. And we're seeing with the economy, with the lack of meaningful jobs, with our porous border, with the cities under fire from Venezuelan gangs, and for that matter, other gangs committing crimes. On down the line, you have to be basically suicidal to take any other vote. Now, I know the Liz Cheneys of the world have now endorsed Kamala Harris, but Liz Cheney doesn't have to care about such things that us peasants do. And all these other Republicans who say they're going to support Kamala Harris over Donald Trump, they really don't have to worry about the things us peasants have to worry about. But the reality is, us peasants are everywhere, even if some of us peasants don't like Donald Trump. And the reality is, our peasantry is one thing that we all have in common. I love Trump. You dislike Trump. But guess what we have in common? We're both serfs. We're both people who are working a certain level of our lifetime, our work week, solely to pay for the government, and it's spending on programs that don't work, like the Green Energy Plan, spending on these Inflation Reduction Acts that aren't reducing inflation, in fact, exacerbating it. We're all living in an area where you never know when the border is going to hit you. I mean, you look at Aurora, Colorado, for instance, as an example. Aurora, Colorado is not a border city, and Denver's not a border city either, but they made themselves a sanctuary city, and guess what's happening? So now it's not just people on the border who are suffering, it's everybody moving in. Look at the people in Chicago. The bad border situation has penetrated the middle of America. And so, yeah, if I talk to somebody who says, I don't like Trump, I have to ask them, that's fine, but don't you think his policies are going to make you like yourself even more and your situation in life even more? And so that was the fun part. Well, there were a lot of fun parts of that town hall meeting, but that was the part that really stuck out to me that I wanted to bring you. I also want to follow up on the school shooting in Georgia. And if you can believe this is how dark some of these libs are. Kamala Harris was in New Hampshire, where they had to bus a bunch of people in. 12 buses came in with people full of people from Massachusetts, just because she can't get a crowd. She did that in Georgia, too. She had to bus people in there. So there she's busing people in because she needs a crowd. But at the time that she gave this speech yesterday in New Hampshire, the vans carrying the bodies were literally just rolling out of the campus of those who were killed. So so she didn't wait 1 second in any way, shape, or form to decide she was going to politicize the issue and turn it into one requiring a reaction that requires gun control.
Hey,
I mean,
folks,
and that's
Donald Trump Jr.
Oh, hi, Donald Trump Jr.
News.
What are you doing
the
here?
The world's central banks
How are you?
making
good for you, man. I get you. So
If you're
at some
with
point,
lung disease, tooth decay,
I these commercials, and Ethan, these people don't pay, so I always skip them. So here we go.
End this epidemic of gun violence in our country once and for all. You know, it doesn't have to be this way.
Yeah, we have to end this epidemic of gun violence once and for all. Now, of course, there's no such thing as gun violence. As you all know, it's a Mockingbird media term that doesn't exist. And the reality is, in the wake of this Georgia high school shooting, there are many things on a list that are actionable and realistic that don't require peaceful gun-owning individuals to give up their rights. So we have a few things going on. First of all, we know one thing about the Georgia shooting is that school resource officers work. It actually is good to have somebody who is of a law enforcement capacity in a school. It's not a bad thing. Now, obviously, it didn't prevent the shooting to begin with, but it did prevent the shooting from becoming something of a mass carnage. So we know one thing is for sure, school resource officers work. We know another thing that is actionable that works. Letting kids keep their cell phones in school. Taking kids' cell phones away in a school is a stupid idea. There are many kids yesterday whose lives were saved by the fact that they had cell phones and could communicate and beyond. Now, the answer, of course, the idea of taking cell phones away is the same idea of taking guns away. And it's like the guns aren't the problem and the cell phones aren't the problem. It's the accountability and the responsibility of those who have said guns and said phones. So instead of just taking everybody's cell phones away, why don't you actually do some leadership as an adult and just not let them use them while they're in class? Yeah, but every once in a while somebody's going to do it. That's true. Then punish them. There's a way around having to take away everybody's cell phones. We know also that it helps when authorities know that someone is potentially violent. It helps to follow up. It's very simple. The FBI was on this kid, or at least aware of this kid, for 13 months before this shooting happened because he was threatening people. Now, of course, there's a lot of that goes on, but these threats were pretty serious, and yet there was very little follow-up. And I'm not sure there was much follow-up even from the parents. I don't know what the parents were doing or what this is all about or how that all happened. Which leads me to the fourth actionable reality that doesn't require taking guns away from peaceful and responsible gun owners. And that is, if you have a kid who you know is problematic, and even for that matter, on the record is violent, maybe that's a good time to make sure that you keep your guns away from them. And maybe that's a good time to be sure. And obviously, I don't know how this kid got his gun or got that gun, took it from the basement, did whatever. Maybe it wasn't locked up. Who knows? It clearly wasn't locked up. And that's another thing us gun owners can do that is actionable, and that is encourage responsible gun ownership, gun usage, and everything else. And that's what we do anyway, right? That's what we do if we're responsible. So those are all things, those four things I just mentioned are things that if you're going to make a list of things that need to happen, or for instance, not happen with the cell phones, then gun control would not even appear on the list in order to prevent mass shootings, carnage, and protect our kids in schools. So those things can all happen. But the problem is many people on the left, including the media, and in this case, Kamala Harris, they really don't think that way because they're simpletons and they're left-wingers and they're reactionary and they are totally and completely uncreative when it comes to resolving problems. Got a problem with money? Got a problem with things that you need to help people with? Let's just take the money from somebody else in taxes instead of creatively budgeting so we can help everybody. But see, that's the general reactionary reaction of the uniparty, of the Democrat Party, is to throw money at it, do whatever. And when something like this happens, the reaction is just to go ahead and start talking about taking rights away from peaceful people and not addressing the violent people in communities, including mental illness and beyond. So this thing yesterday was another example, and it happened all day long today. Everybody trying to mimic the whole gun control argument when there's so much else to talk about in terms of making sure that we get things done and prevent these kinds of things from happening to our children. And it's very, very easy when you just get creative and you understand the circumstances. So check her off as any kind of thinking leader, that is for sure. Okay, coming up, you're going to love this. Ketanji Brown Jackson, the Supreme Court Justice, has suddenly become a scientist, a biologist. I'll explain that on the other side here, but first I want to let you guys know about my friends over at Grasser Electric. Grasser Electric, Shane and the team have been longtime friends of free Common Sense Radio. Common Sense Conservative Radio. Shane is a great guy, lives and breathes common sense conservatism. His business is great. He is fantastic at what he does. Sean, his electrician, all of the electricians are great. Some of them do commercial electricianing, where they are helping you if you have a business, either when you build your business to wire it up or maybe change the wiring, do whatever you need. So they do great commercial work and, of course, great residential work, which I have used constantly. And Sean can tell you that. Thank you, Sean, for all your hard work. Grasser will give you a free estimate, obviously. And Grasser also has a ton of different kinds of ways to help you out in terms of making things work. No job too big or too small. That's GrasserElectric.com. GrasserElectric.com. Make sure you thank them for supporting free Common Sense Radio and the brand new Allman Report here on Newstalk STL.
You're listening to the Allman Report on NewsTalkSTL.
Good evening this evening, everyone. I noticed some of you on the feed say, instead of GMTM, you're saying GETE. Clever. Good evening this evening, everyone. And good morning this morning if you're listening in the morning. I don't know. We do know one thing. This is the Allman Report on News Talk STL 101.9 and 94.1. Thank you so much for listening. Thanks for being there on all of our social media platforms, including the News Talk Facebook page, my Facebook page, YouTube, Twitter, Truth Social. We got you all over the place. It just depends on where you prefer to listen or what have you. So thank you very much for loving the Allman Report all across the land. All right, so Ketanji Brown Jackson, you know her as our Supreme Court Justice, one of them at least. And so I don't know how a Supreme Court Justice would have time after they are appointed to get, for instance, a degree in biology. I don't know how you do it. I don't know how they have time. Unless they have unlimited amounts of time and don't have that many cases and can take the time to do, like, maybe she did an online course or something like that. Because it's apparent she did take a course in biology, otherwise it was biology, from the time that she was talked to in the confirmation hearings to the time that she did this interview with PBS, thanks to your tax dollars. So here's how the interview with PBS went. Check it out.
As the first black woman to serve on the U.S. Supreme Court, how do you perceive your role in the broader context of American history and progress?
Well, it definitely demonstrates progress, I think. So many people have received my appointment in that light. I'm the first black woman, as you say, but...
Oh, you are? Because I thought that you didn't know what a woman was. I mean, I saw it on tape. I saw it live during your confirmation hearings. You actually couldn't explain what a woman was when Marsha Blackburn was asking you to tell us if you could define a woman.
Can you provide a definition for the word woman?
Can I provide a definition?
Mm-hmm.
No.
Yeah.
I can't.
You can't?
Not in this context.
So
I'm not a biologist.
The meaning of the word.
Oh, so you're not a biologist. Well, you weren't a biologist, but now apparently at PBS, you are a biologist, right? I mean,
many people have received my appointment in that light.
Just trying to figure this out.
I'm the first black woman, as you say.
Okay, so you are a black woman, you are a woman, but at the time when you were asked to define a woman, you said that you couldn't define what a woman was. So how did you come from that time in your confirmation hearing to this time where you're able to actually say you're a black woman? And it would be great if the PBS guy, but he's not me, so he wouldn't say that, would say, can you define black woman? And see what she had to say then. And she could say, well, now that I'm a biologist, I can. I don't know what she would say. But there was a method, I believe, to her madness then in refusing to define a woman. Because she must have known that eventually, and this will happen eventually, the Supreme Court is probably going to be faced with having to define a woman. So maybe this was her way of saying, well, I really don't know, leaving herself open to decide these issues regarding men in women's sports, mainly like the transgender issue in women's sports, that kind of thing, Title IX issues and beyond. Because Marsha Blackburn, during this time, was actually probing and digging into, that's why she asked her about defining a woman, because there was going to be an issue eventually confronting the Supreme Court about such issues as Title IX and the involvement of biological men in women's sports. That's not a social issue. That is a legal issue, and certainly something the Supreme Court would be able to entertain.
Woman is so unclear and controversial that you can't give me a definition?
Senator, in my work as a judge, what I do is I address disputes. If there's a dispute about a definition, people make arguments, and I look at the law and I decide.
Well, so that in itself is confusing, because when you are adjudicating such issues as biological men and women's sports, you will have to be in a situation where you will have to ascertain whether or not those biological men are biological men, and whether the women whose sports these biological men are invading are actually women. So you ultimately would have to define that, and especially when, as you point out, there would be a dispute, so you would have to actually intervene in that dispute and make a decision on your own. There is no legal aspect to what a man is, and there's no legal aspect to what a woman is. There's only a scientific aspect, and based on that scientific aspect, you would have to determine one way or the other whether or not a man is a man and a woman is a woman. And again, because that is in the context of a legal argument, so you'd have to find some way to determine that. You can't just kind of say, I don't know. I'm not a biologist. I mean, if all the Supreme Court justices decided we're not going to take this case because we're not biologists, well, that's not sufficient, nor is it the charter of the Supreme Court. If you have a legal battle, you are going to have to find some way to determine said legal battle if it is germane to a Supreme Court hearing.
I'm not.
The fact that you can't give me a straight answer about something as fundamental as what a woman is underscores the dangers of the kind of progressive education that we are hearing about. Just last week, an entire generation of young girls watched as our taxpayer-funded institutions permitted a biological man to compete and beat a biological woman in the NCAA swimming championships.
So it wouldn't be sufficient in a situation like that Marsha Blackburn just described, if that in fact became a legal case. It wouldn't be sufficient for Ketanji Brown Jackson to recuse herself because she's not a biologist. She couldn't do that. You can't do that. Now, if I were Marsha Blackburn, I would have taken it a step further and maybe asked. I'm not cracking on Marsha Blackburn by any stretch of the imagination, but and there's a heat of the moment, and you're doing this, and so you're not always kind of thinking about this kind of stuff. But you'd have to then follow up and say, so would you recuse yourself from any court case involving this dispute or this question by saying that you're not a biologist? And at that point, I'd be curious to hear what Ketanji Brown Jackson's viewpoint would be at that time. And if PBS had any brains or any kind of curiosity as journalists, they would ask her after she said, I am a black woman, they would say, okay, so you know what a woman is. So then how would you deal with a situation where there's a question about whether or not men, biological men, should play in biological female sports? Because you yourself just said you're a woman. So you obviously know what a woman is. And I was being facetious when I was suggesting, a smartass when I was suggesting that she got a biology degree. She didn't get a biology degree and doesn't have one. So she knows that she's a woman without having a biologist degree. So therefore, her answer at the time of her confirmation hearing was a sidestep and was clearly evasive.
What message do you think this sends to girls who aspire to compete and win in sports at the highest levels?
I don't know.
Senator,
I'm not a biologist.
I'm not sure what message that sends. If you're asking me about the legal issues related to it,
she is.
Those are topics that are being hotly discussed, as you say, and could come to the court.
Yeah, they could. So again, at that point, you're Marsha Blackburn, and she would say, well, what would you do then? Would you tell the people arguing the case the same thing you just told me, that you can't really involve yourself in the case like this because you're not a biologist? Because the legal issue and the biology issue are inextricably intertwined. You can't separate those two. You can't any more than you could separate what is a human life from a legal issue. So this is nuts, and there's so much here that should be explored. I wish it was explored at the time by Marsha Blackburn, but more importantly, I wish it was explored by that doofus PBS reporter when she stated clearly that she's a black woman. I'm not trying to be a smart aleck here. This is real stuff here. And so we've established, and Ketanji Brown Jackson has established, that she is a woman, that she knows what a woman is without being a biologist. So her answer there was a bad one, and I believe should be followed up on in some way, shape, or form beyond the Allman Report. You know what I'm saying? All right. Speaking of the Allman Report, yes, coming up next, yet another automaker is off of the EV train. And rightly so, because the EV train is a train to nowhere. The EV revolution is never going to happen. It's based on totally false science. And I'll explain all that on the other side here on the Allman Report on News Talk STL.
You're listening to the Allman Report on NewsTalkSTL.
Who do you think I am? Seriously. You think that I would introduce a segment about cars and play the cars? Why would I do that? I mean, why would I do that? That would be like AM radio. And this is FM radio. And this is the Allman Report on NewsTalkSTL. So, no, you didn't catch me being cute. No. So we know that the electric vehicle thing is fake, phony. It doesn't matter how many cars you transfer to EV. If 100% of all the cars in the United States fleet were all electric vehicles, scientific proof shows that there would be an infinitesimal effect on the environment and carbon emissions. It just is science. It's 0.003 or whatever, even if they were all wiped out by 2050. There's no way. Because cars don't represent that much of a pollutant. It's just that simple. The EV revolution is based on a bunch of green crazies who have decided to go ahead and bankroll a bunch of green buddies in the corporate world and even automakers in an attempt to get them to join them in their feel-good revolution of the decade. But that's not going to happen. It's not happening now. People are gradually falling away from an interest in electric vehicles, and for good reason. One of those aspects, have you ever heard of a thing called road anxiety or mileage anxiety or time on the road anxiety or length of time to be able to stay on the road without running out of gas anxiety? You've been there before, right? Where you have passed a couple of filling station exits, you know, and I gotta wait out, just wait. And then suddenly you're out in the middle of nowhere, and at that point you're watching your gas tank gauge go down, down, down. You can't see anything but mountains and roads for miles and miles, and you start getting freaked out. Well, that's something that is part of the life of an electric vehicle owner. Yes, they do have gauges that show them the amount of power, but no, they don't know when they're going to find a charging station, because every exit along the highway and every exit along a road will not have a charging station. So the anxiety factor is even worse among EV vehicle owners. So at that point, that's just one aspect of driving an electric vehicle that is not attractive. And so gradually, as you have seen even with Hertz, for instance, like Hertz, they decided, whoa, I know what we're going to do. We're going to follow up on the whole EV revolution and be part of the woke crowd, and we're going to start renting EVs. Well, instead what happened is a person on a business trip or a person on a family vacation who is renting a car, they're not going to rent an electric vehicle. They don't know where charging stations are. It's not like you can see them like you see a mobile sign someplace. And so people don't want to bother with it. They don't want to bother with the time taken to charge the car, which also is a factor in the unattractiveness of the EV. So gradually, Hertz figured, we've got this entire fleet and nobody's renting it, so we're going to go ahead and decide to sell the fleet off. Well, just so happens that Elon Musk drastically reduced the prices of the Tesla. So when the Hertz people decided they were going to try to sell the cars on the open market, the value was drastically reduced. They lost millions of dollars. They were hosed completely. There are many auto manufacturers now who are saying, we're not going to do this. anymore, or at least we're going to pretend we're going to delay the rollout of certain vehicles, and then, of course, they're never going to roll them out. So you all know Ford recently delayed the release of this 3-row electric SUV. They were going to delay it until 2027. That is a delay that will be in perpetuity. They will never roll out the anticipated 3-row electric USV because they know there's not going to be a market for it, especially by 2027. There's not a market for it now, and that market is not going to improve. No matter how much people keep pushing the EVs and keep claiming that the EV is the way to go, and people have lost this sense of righteousness in having an EV. There are people who have them. I know people who have them, and they love them, but they have the cars because they love them, and they like them, and they're unique, and they're novel, but they don't have them because they want to contribute necessarily to the environment or to saving the environment, because hopefully they know by now that whatever goal they have is a useless one, because whatever they're doing is going to have no effect on the environment whatsoever. Ford also decided they were going to reduce its investment in EVs by $12 billion, citing lower than expected demand, of course. Then, similarly, General Motors cut in half its EV production target, now aiming to produce only 200,000 EVs by 2024 instead of the originally planned 400,000. So they're quitting, basically. And they'll barely sell these 200,000, in my opinion. And then Volkswagen came in, scaled back plans to build their global battery factories, 6 of them, because there's just not a demand for the cars, so therefore not a demand for the batteries. And then Mercedes-Benz, who inexplicably once committed to being fully electric by 2025, also pushed back the rollout of this commitment to be electric by 2025. They said, we're not committing anymore. Hope you don't mind, but we're not doing that. And, of course, General Motors, also the dealership selling EVs, thousands of them closed throughout the country. And so they're not and there was no incentive on the part of these dealerships to get involved in selling vehicles they were barely selling, because in order to sell the vehicle, you also have to have a way to repair them. So these dealerships were saying, all right, so we're going to sell these vehicles, but in order to do that, we also have to have a service area to service the vehicles we sell. And that's going to cost us millions to retool our service base, or for that matter, even build new service bays. So this isn't going to happen one way or the other, and the dealerships are just gone. And thousands of people are unemployed or just had to move. So now our Swedish friends over at Volvo, and this is the latest one, they've become the latest automaker to scrap their vehicle production targets, citing again a decrease in overall demand. In a statement, and I'll read this to you, company CEO Jim Rohn admitted that customers are not ready to switch just yet. Let me tell you something. They're never going to be ready. Well, they're not ready to switch just yet, but eventually, no. There's no eventually, and there's no not ready, because they'll never be ready, and there's no just yet, because there never be a yet. There'll never be a time when they're buying these cars. And yet the guy still says, we are resolute in our belief that our future is electric. It's like, dude, you're out of your mind. I think he's just saying that because, the kind of pressure that is being put on so many of these automakers, and it is really, really rough. And so we're watching right in front of our eyes the EV revolution die. And rightly so. No offense to those of you who have any of these electric cars out there. I know a lot of you do, and I'm not making fun of you. And a lot of you love your Teslas and things like that, so knock yourselves out. So this isn't a crack on you or a crack even on your intelligence, because I know you bought them just because they're fun and not because they are saving the environment. Because if that's the case, I'm here to tell you they're not saving the environment. So there are two things going on with the death of the EV. First, there's no such thing as an effect on the environment. And secondly, consumers just simply do not like them. That's the bottom line. All right, how's this going to go, by the way, for Barron Trump? Did you hear the news? Barron Trump is now attending his first day of classes, flanked by the Secret Service, at New York University, NYU. Now, if I do recall last spring, oh my goodness, NYU was one of the schools where they had all those pro-Hamas, anti-Israel riots on the campus and camps and things like that. So I'm sure Barron is not going to be affected by that. So he's still going to NYU. I'm not quite sure I would go there under the circumstances, but he is. That was his choice. And plus, it's easy because you know where his dorm is? Trump Tower. So anybody in college would love to have their dorm be Trump Tower, and that's exactly what it is. I'm trying to figure out what this looks like at NYU. So what happened this morning is that Barron gets out of his, the SUV. He's escorted to the dean's office, and then he's off to class. And I know you really can't videotape. Maybe we'll see some. I don't think you really can, but I would love to see what this looks like in an NYU classroom, like whether or not, the Secret Service guys are sitting next to him or they're in the back, or how this is going to work. But God love him. He's like 100 feet tall, good-looking guy, and going to school like a normal person does. Dad, super proud of him, and that's pretty cool. Did you guys know, also, by the way, in other news, that Fani Willis apparently is still with her lover, Nathan Wade? I know you guys have probably forgotten her. She's that corrupt attorney and prosecutor in Georgia. And at the time that she was put on the stand, she said very flatly, this was in February of last year, of 2024, sorry. In February 2024, where she said under oath that her relationship with Nathan Wade ended months ago.
Ended
at the time.
You left it in August of 2023. That sound right?
That's the hard conversation. That's not the...
We've covered this. Next question.
Yeah, okay, so she said pretty flatly, and this was kind of one of these things where she was just being a jerk and going back and forth. And she said that her relationship with Nathan Wade ended way before the indictment of Donald Trump. And that was pivotal because people trying to link the nefariousness of this relationship and the money spending and the money laundering and all that kind of stuff were not going to be able to link it in her mind to the indictment of Donald Trump, and therefore it would not have an effect on the outcome of the case or the continuance of the case. In that case, this case is dead as it is, but nonetheless. So that said, it was very surprising to see on video Fani Willis and Nathan Wade both coming to the scene of her daughter's arrest for driving on a suspended license. She showed up on the street. This is body cam video.
Couple hours.
You can only hear it. If you can see it, you ought to patent that. You make a lot of money off of that.
Okay.
So she shows up at this scene with Nathan Wade.
Apparently, her license is suspended.
Which must prove that actually she is still with Nathan Wade. She is still dating him And unless the relationship was over and then it was just simply rekindled after the storm passed, we don't know. But we do know right now that Nathan Wade and Fonnie are a team. And by the way, they were able to come and take her car, which is, I thought normally you arrest somebody for driving with a suspended license, you tow their car. But I guess sometimes people get special privileges. Special people get special privileges. Speaking of privileges taken away, you got to hear this from Tulsi Gabbard. If this doesn't call for a congressional investigation, I don't know what does. It's Allman Report, News Talk STL.
You're listening to the Allman Report on NewsTalkSTL.
Good evening this evening, everyone. Welcome to the Allman Report on NewsTalkSTL. It's been a great couple of weeks. Thank you guys all for being there with me, for me. Thank you, Ethan Valencia. Fresh off the celebration of his birthday yesterday, all right. How old you be, man?
29.
Oh, look at you. You don't even look 29.
What do I look?
I'd card you at Bush Family Brewing.
They don't always anymore, you know. They don't always card me anymore.
Huh. I like being carded. And it's usually only it's just only a formality for most cases, you know. When I'm buying my my Zyn, my nicotine things I stick in my mouth. Love those things. I learned that from Tucker Carlson. He presented them one time on one of his podcasts or something. He was doing these nicotine things. And I'm not much of a smoker. Occasionally I will when I drink or do whatever. But when I found out about Zyn, I'm thinking, dang, that's great. Now, it's not like chew, and it's not something that, you know, it sticks out on your lip or something, and some people keep it in their back pocket still, but whatever. It comes in a round container, and it's nicotine. You can get certain levels of it. You can get 3, 6. Europeans do like 45. My heart would jump right out of my chest if I had one of those. But it's good, and now you can do nicotine whenever you want to, and I don't see any studies that show nicotine's particularly bad for you by itself, but oh well, I don't know. But yeah, when you buy it, sometimes you have to present your ID. Oftentimes, I do occasionally will have somebody say and be shocked that my birth date is 1963 because they say you don't look like you were that old. I'm thinking, well, that's good too. And they say, but that's not why I didn't card. That's not why I carded you. Carded you because I have to. I'm like, okay, that's good. Plus, you get carded at self-checkout too. That's good too. If you really want to feel young, you can go through self-checkout and you get carded when you buy booze. That's few. You know, hey, listen, hey, don't laugh because Ethan, as you get older, you look for ways to do that. I'm not one of those people who, you know, I turned 50. It's like, oh no, it doesn't bother me. I love it when people turn 30 though, which you'll be doing next year, Ethan. You're like, I'm 30. Like, it's okay. You're 30 for crying out loud. It's good. All right, this is shocking to me, and I love Tulsi Gabbard. I think she's great. I think she is a warhorse for DJT, just like J.D. Vance is, and she's great, especially when it comes to facing off with the female powerhouses on the liberal side, like Kamala Harris. She's a perfect person for that kind of fight. I think Donald Trump is too, J.D. Vance is too, but it's always better to have some well put together woman who is really good at putting down supposedly well put together liberal women. But this was shocking to me by any stretch of the imagination. And the story that Tulsi Gabbard is about to tell is a story that if it happened to anybody who was liberal at the hands of a Trump administration, it would be front page news. And it would be under the category of abuse of power. And this is crazy. You can't even make this up. I mean, I'm listening to her tell this story and thinking, I know that's not fake. And the fact that it's so outrageous and it's not fake is shocking beyond words. Listen to what she has to say here. And this is Tulsi Truth. It's like one of her little podcasty type of things. Tulsi Truth. And this is hard.
I enlisted in the Army to defeat the Islamist terrorists who attacked us on 9/11 and to keep our country safe. I've served now for over 21 years, deployed to war zones in both the Middle East and Africa, put my life on the line for the freedom and safety of the American people, and still serve today. Now, my own government has placed me on a secret terror watch list, targeting me as a potential domestic terror threat. Why? Political retaliation. I spoke out about how dangerous Kamala Harris would be to our nation if she were to be elected as president, and why the American people should be very concerned. Now, just before boarding a flight on July 23rd, my husband and I were pulled aside for additional TSA screening. Our electronics were swabbed for traces of explosives, and when we landed, my husband was pulled aside for another round of additional screening. On the next several flights that we took, our boarding passes were marked with the Quad S, and we were subjected to in-depth searches by the TSA.
And by the way, in this piece, she has all the receipts. Everything is screenshotted and beyond. So she has everything. And we're looking at the boarding pass that is marked up and everything else.
Every single time, each time taking 30 to 45 minutes, every inch of our body patted down, every item in our carry-on searched and swabbed for explosive residue, and sometimes going through this all over again at the gate before being allowed to board the plane. Every time this happened, we were told by the TSA agent there, this is just a random selection. Now, that might have been believable if it had happened just once or twice, but 5, 6, 7, 8 times in a row, there's no way.
8 times in a row, this happened to her and her husband. 8 times in a row. And at this point, I fly. You have respect for the TSA sometimes. Sometimes they're a little bit gruff, but most of the time they're all right. But this isn't something where I believe these enforcers should be able to use the excuse, well, I'm just following orders. Because this is completely a violation. Now, I do realize that flying is a privilege. It is not a right. I get that. But we all know what this is about. And Tulsi foreshadows it in the beginning of her bit there, and she'll flesh it out a little more here, that all of this was timed directly in the aftermath of her criticism of Kamala Harris. So this didn't happen before she opened her mouth in criticizing Kamala Harris and, to an extension, the Biden administration.
On August 4th, federal air marshal whistleblowers came forward with very disturbing information. They revealed that I had been added to a secret terror watch list run by the TSA called Quiet Skies on July 23rd. This is the very same day my husband and I began to be subjected to those in-depth TSA searches. These are images of the TSA targeting package that the air marshals were given as part of their mission brief.
So she has a copy of the targeting brochure that these guys all carry around with them, and it looks like something out of a Matrix movie or whatever. It's like a dossier. It's got a picture on it and the little printout and everything else of all the reasons that she is being watched.
I later learned that at least 3 air marshals were assigned to watch me every time I traveled, in the airport and on the flight.
Did you hear that? 3 air marshals assigned to watch her at the airport and on board her flight. 3 of them. Now, I don't know why this isn't a bigger deal. If anything calls for congressional oversight, this one absolutely does. Why there are no conservatives out there, people in the legislature and Congress, what have you, calling on an immediate investigation into the treatment of a politician while she's flying and beyond. This is something that would not be tolerated in any way, shape, or form if this was anybody on the liberal side. I mean, hell, it shouldn't even be tolerated for anybody, for that matter. Is there anybody in the United States of America who has 3 air marshals basically watching them not only at the airport, but also on the plane? Now, also that is required in order for them to enact the air marshal squads is every time she buys a ticket to fly, an alert goes out to the federal government. So she could be on her computer someplace, buying a ticket to D.C. or D.C. to here, and it immediately goes right to the federal government, and they dispatch their people to her flight. They know everything about what she and her husband are doing, everything.
TSA deployed explosive K-9 detection teams and a TSA explosive specialist. Now, this is extreme by any measure. What were they looking for? What kind of threat did they think I posed? What were they afraid that I was going to do? None of this made sense until I put all the pieces together. On July 21st, President Biden announced he was dropping out of the presidential race.
So, by the way, if you remember, and you left a crumb there on this video, she said that her knowledge of all this and the fact that she was clued in by whistleblowers, this all had July 23rd. So she's talking about July 21st being the date that Biden dropped out.
And endorsing Kamala Harris to be the Democratic nominee. On July 22nd, I did an interview with Fox News' Laura Ingraham about how dangerous a potential Kamala Harris presidency would be for our country. Here's what I said.
Foreign policy decisions are being made by unelected people in the military-industrial complex who are profiting from us being in a constant state of war, and the national security state that has more power to undermine our freedoms and liberties when we are in a state of war. Kamala Harris does not have the strength to stand up to the military-industrial complex.
The very next day, on July 23rd, the TSA placed me on the Quiet Skies domestic terror watch list in what I can only describe as the ultimate betrayal.
That's incredible. The day after her appearance on Laura Ingraham, where she challenged the leadership qualities, the leadership abilities of Kamala Harris, the day after, based on the information she got from the whistleblower, she was placed on the so-called Quiet Skies list. Unbelievable. I can't believe that this is something the New York Times is delving into, the Washington Post, NBC, ABC, any news outlet out there in the mainstream, and yet crickets.
After putting my life on the line to defend the safety and security of the American people, the Harris-Biden regime has now labeled me a domestic terror threat. Why? They see me as a threat to their power. The Harris-Biden administration and Democrat elite have spent years weaponizing our law enforcement, our national security state, even enlisting the help of their friends in big tech and the mainstream propaganda media to retaliate against those who dare to criticize their actions and their policies, those they deem a threat to their power, because that's all they care about.
Yeah. And I think you could also trace this back to the assassination attempt on Donald Trump. And you might think, well, that's a whacked out conspiracy theory, but you put it all together and you do realize that President Trump is a threat to every aspect of the deep state and our unelected bureaucracy, and even indeed our elected bureaucracy, which is why you get a lot of people in our elected bureaucracy who don't care really necessarily about really digging in oversight-wise to what happened to Tulsi Gabbard. And yeah, they did a pretty good job, some of them, of investigating the whole scenario, including putting the Secret Service director and then the acting Secret Service director on the hot seat. But you notice Mayorkas hasn't been talked to yet. And I'm not saying Josh Hawley did a great job with all of this, and so did some of the other senators, but I think they still need to talk to Mayorkas about this. I don't mean to digress too much on this, but they should be doing more. And so a lot of them are simply sitting on their hands. This should be an outrage among outrage. This is, in my opinion, a crime against an American citizen, Tulsi Gabbard, and should be investigated immediately. And if it's not investigated by authorities, it should be investigated by people in the news media at least, because this is absolute abuse of power.
Power. On August 21st, the Congressional Committee on the Weaponization of the Federal Government launched an investigation into the TSA's clearly politically motivated actions against me to expose the truth. I am not the only political dissident the Harris-Biden regime is targeting.
So I ask you, though, they launched that investigation, but what has come out of it? And is there any, in any way, shape, or form, any news that has come out of it? Or is it just, well, we've launched this investigation, but, I mean, it shouldn't take long for these individuals with not only subpoena power, but investigative power to start to follow the power in all of this. This shouldn't take long, especially Tulsi Gabbard's the one who has all the documentation. All it takes is a few steps. That was August 21st, and I realize that was only technically about 3 weeks ago. But this is a story, in my opinion, that ultimately is just going to die by the wayside,
On Saturday, Christmas Eve of 2022, the IRS opened an investigation into independent journalist Matt Taibbi, just 3 weeks after he began publishing the Twitter files.
So you get the drift here. Tulsi Gabbard is absolutely dangerous to the unelected bureaucracy and indeed even the elected bureaucracy and the deep state. And we can only pray that nothing ultimately happens to her. The bottom line is this. In the end, there's a lot of positivity here because she is a great ally for Donald Trump, and she has all the receipts and all the goods and indeed, unfortunately, the entirety of the negative and abusive experience of dealing with a vengeful dictatorship like the one that is being utilized by the Biden-Harris administration. So this story should not be over. That TSA committee, that committee investigating the TSA, we should not let that drop. I know Tulsi Gabbard won't. And I also know if Donald Trump is elected president of the United States in November, and then once he's sworn into office, they are going to be burning some huts, as I have suggested they do. And I hope that they do that. Coming up, another example of a great warrior, a truth teller, J.D. Vance. His reaction to Liz Cheney endorsing Kamala Harris is absolutely amazing. This guy just goes there like no other Republican I've heard talk, except for maybe Donald Trump. I'll have J.D. Vance and his evisceration of Liz Cheney on the other side of this. You'll want to hear this because I know how you all feel about Liz Cheney, so it's going to feel good. Grab a drink and sit back and relax and enjoy J.D. Vance carving up Liz Cheney. On the other side here, the Allman Report, News Talk STL.
You're listening to the Allman Report on NewsTalkSTL.
If you see me walking down the street and I start to cry each time we meet, walk on.
You know, this is happy hour music, you know? I'm thinking that maybe down the line, let me know in the comments section what you think of the possibility of having like a pre-show live happy hour. We do it at like 7 o'clock or something like that. And we would just have a drink together, talk to each other on the comments, you know, and do that kind of thing, and just hang out and have like a mass live happy hour. I think maybe we could do that even like at a big Zoom. I don't know. You could just do it here on the Facebook page and have a little pre-show live happy hour and then do the show. Just makes me feel like I want a hiatus tequila on ice with some lime. I could have the hiatus Blanco or the hiatus Reposado. The Reposado's good. A lot of women drinking the Reposado these days. I think it's the answer to the guy's whiskey. But it doesn't taste like whiskey. It's Reposado. It's really super smooth tequila. And as I've said before, hiatus is the official tequila of the Allman Report. So, and tequila's good for you. It's half the calories of vodka, gin, whiskey, whatever. So a shot of tequila is like 45 calories as opposed to like 70, 80, 90. It also has 100% agave in it, so it's like you're eating your vegetables too. So don't go all getting whacked out on tequila and blame me, though, for telling you it's good for you. When I first talked about it, I thought I sound like you remember that doctor selling Chesterfield cigarettes and smoking them. It's good for you. It's like, I understand alcohol by itself isn't always great for you. It's great for me, but it's not always great for you. So I'm not encouraging you to drink your heads off. But yeah, maybe we'll do that. We'll try that next week. We'll see how that goes. I wouldn't be able to do too much of that this week because I've been filling in on KFYI 550 in Phoenix and iHeart Station there. So that's been fun to do that. I was filling in for the Conservative Circus. Yeah, and that was fun. But I'm done with that this week at least, so I'll be back there for you guys to pick up on that. All right, J.D. Vance. I'll tell you one thing. Between J.D. Vance and Tulsi Gabbard, Donald Trump has some real gunfighters on his side and on his behalf, and I really appreciate these people, and I think they're going to be amazing. Just wait until President Trump is elected. And I know there's a guy out there named Nostradamus, right? He's a pollster. And they claim he accurately predicts the outcome of elections and has done so since 1984 and predicts the election of Kamala Harris. He's got like 13 keys that make the basis of his prediction, but 3 of them the conclusions are based on faulty analysis. So he's claiming that the economy is great, which actually absolutely is not the case. He is claiming that we are at peace and we are not involved in foreign configurations, which is absolutely not the case. And he claims in some way, shape, or form that there's no social unrest. Now, how do you define social unrest? Well, he defines it as like people hitting the streets, protesting, that kind of thing. I don't think we can say that the pro-Hamas demonstrations really represent pervasive social unrest. But I know what does represent pervasive social unrest. Marauding, illegal, alien Venezuelan gangs throughout our country, crime in the streets of America, an economy that is forcing people to make choices they otherwise didn't have to make regarding groceries and beyond. So that's a level of social unrest. When there's social instability, that doesn't mean that things have to be on fire. It could just mean that there's a level of a lack of social cohesion that I think is evident here in this country right now. So I'm not convinced that the basis on which he makes his decision and prognostication this time is really in any way, shape, or form based on anything real. So we'll see how it goes. But they do call him Nostradamus, so who knows? Anyway, J.D. Vance is asked to comment on Liz Cheney and her announcement that she is endorsing Kamala Harris. And, of course, you all know Liz Cheney. She's a dirtbag and a terrible person and has made a real career out of kind of being the Republican who's against Donald Trump, and everybody in the media loves her, everything else. So yesterday, she endorses Kamala Harris, and J.D. Vance is at the Turning Point convention there in Arizona, and on stage, he finds out about it for the first time. Here, let me turn my Dionne Warwick down. I was so enamored with that, I kept it on. So here we go.
Oh, no. Big endorsement. Liz Cheney endorsed Kamala Harris. Oh, no. And it's so interesting, isn't it, that every failed warmonger in the established D.C., let's just say machine, is behind Kamala Harris. That the peacemakers are behind Trump and Vance. Blessed are the peacemakers, is what the scriptures say. Your thoughts, JD?
Well, maybe the best thing, not the very best thing, but a very good thing that I could say about the next presidency of Donald J. Trump is that he's going to make sure that people like Liz Cheney are laughed out of the Oval Office instead of rewarded, because this is a person whose entire career has been about sending other people's children off to fight and die for her military conflicts and her ridiculous ideas that somehow we were going to turn Afghanistan, a country that doesn't even have running water in a lot of places, into a thriving liberal democracy. And for that, Liz Cheney was willing to kill thousands of your children. Liz Cheney, you know what? I think it's the best thing in the world that she's supporting Kamala Harris. You are right. Blessed are the peacemakers. Kamala Harris and Liz Cheney make very, very interesting partners. They get rich when America's sons and daughters go off to die. They get rich when America loses wars instead of winning wars. And they get rich when America gets weaker in the world. We want American strength, American security, and most importantly, peace. Let's bring peace back to the world. And Donald Trump is the candidate to do it.
I want to emphasize.
So, have you ever heard a Republican speak like that, aside from Donald Trump? Have you ever heard a Republican speak in that manner? I have not. Normally, what happens is the Cheneys and the Bushes are still considered to be kind of like Republican emeritus, right? Like a specialized group of people that, yeah, they did some crappy stuff. And yeah, they were pretty bad people. And yeah, they lied to us about Iraq. And yeah, they did make up a bunch of stuff about weapons of mass destruction, although there were some indications that there were, but whatever. So, but still, they're the Bushes and the Cheneys. So they kind of have this coveted kind of place in the Republican circles, even with the existence of someone who is a truth teller like Donald Trump. And so they've always kind of sat on the sidelines as a level of royalty in the Republican Party. H.W. was one as well before he passed away. So to have J.D. Vance speak like this is really a monumental occasion in our Make America Great Again movement. It is a freeing attack on Liz Cheney. And it's something you and I have said to each other, but we really haven't heard our conservative Republican leadership speak in this fashion for fear of maybe stepping on some toes and maybe kind of being insulting to the Bush-Cheney royalty. But those days are gone now. And so to have J.D. Vance throw it down in this fashion is really great and was a monumental event as far as I'm concerned. Didn't get a whole lot of coverage. Certainly didn't get a lot of coverage on many of the mainstream media outlets. And even some conservatives are still reluctant to talk in this manner because we are sometimes afraid of sounding like the leftists that we thought were crazy when we were supporting G.W. Bush. And I will tell you that I was one of those people who supported the Iraq War, who believed the intentions of G.W. Bush. You guys might remember a long time ago, back in the old days, there was a guy named Jim who used to call the show, and this was during the Iraq War. And my son served in the Iraq War. And I'm very proud of him because duty called and he was there, got his combat action badge, everything else. He's not embarrassed about it. We're not orphaning the veterans in Iraq and Afghanistan, which is sometimes the fear. If you act like it was a wrong war and an unjust war, you automatically might put it in the category of Vietnam. We would never want to treat our veterans from Afghanistan and Iraq and even Vietnam like they are orphans. And the way they treated our Vietnam veterans, we've treated our Vietnam veterans, was despicable, that people, the way they did, to spit on them and everything else. And we would never want to reach that category where we throw even the people who served in those wars under the bus. I know a lot of you have or know people who have, and I would never want that to happen, but we have to face certain realities about what happened there and accept them, and still accept two things that can be true. The people who fought in Iraq and Afghanistan, as well as Vietnam, are American heroes through and through, every single one of them. And those who died did not die in vain. They were called to fight by the commander-in-chief, and they did so. So that makes them part of heroic history and not part of a history of nefariousness that we can attach to the overall involvement in the wars and everything else. So I want to make sure you guys know you can still say the things that J.D. Vance said. Well, he's a veteran himself. He's a Marine. So so he's saying that himself. But he's not embarrassed about serving. He's not trying to pretend he didn't serve, and he doesn't consider himself a chump because he did either. So, again, two things can be true. So I think it's great that he's saying this. I really fanciful that it was at a turning point convention, because I think this statement from J.D. Vance was a turning point for the Republican Party and an historical moment and a freeing moment for those of us to go ahead and call a spade and call the Cheneys of the world out and the Bushes of the world out and just absolutely eviscerate them and show them to be the hypocrites and the nefarious power and warmongers that they are and that they were. And back to Jim. Jim, we called him Halliburton Jim, because he'd call and he'd say, "This is a war for oil. This is a war for oil," and Dick Cheney and Halliburton. And we thought it was a kook. Ron Paul the same way. And it turns out they were not kooks at all. All right, coming up. Well, you got to hear this story. This is the one of the news outlets, one of the mainstream media outlets, trying to talk about a court case involving the merger of two grocers. And if you can imagine this, right now the news media, when it sees something on its face, it is now that is negative and negatively reflecting on Biden and Harris, they completely ignore it or don't even mention it. I've got a perfect example of that coming up, where a CBS News manages to just do a story about a grocery merger and high grocery prices without ever mentioning once Bidenomics. That's straight ahead on the Allman Report on News Talk STL.
You're listening to the Allman Report on News Talk STL.
Good evening, everyone. It's the Allman Report on News Talk STL 101.9, 94.1. Thank you very much for being with me on the show this evening. Love ya. And thank you for being there for me all this week. It's been fantastic and last week, and so we're off to a great start here with the brand new Allman Report on News Talk STL. I want to thank my friends at Hanson's Tree Service, Chad Hanson. I've got Jesse coming out to look at a couple of trees. I feel bad. I feel like I haven't taken care of my trees very well. I live in a 114-year-old house. Some of these trees are just about that age. So eventually trees do die, and I'm going to have to take them down. And Hanson's Tree Service I've always used for everything, including my mulch, which I got this brand new, beautiful red mulch this year. And it really looks good at the house and around the pool and beyond. So I love the Hanson's mulch choices. So if you're doing any fall mulching, he's got all kinds of different colors and all different kind of different grinds for you as well. The tree maintenance program is great, and so is the tree takedown program with Hanson's Tree Service. Chad is doing a great job of making sure that he keeps up the legacy of our dear old friend, Jeff Hanson, who has since passed. We miss him dearly, and he would be so proud of what Chad is doing with Hans's Tree Service and how he has managed to make Hans's Tree Service just the way that Dad envisioned it. So Chad's a great guy and a supporter of free, common sense, conservative radio. So thank you, Chad, for your support of the Allman Report. And speaking of the tree takedown program, so he's got tree takedowns can be kind of expensive. I mean, they're very labor intensive, everything else. Chad and the team, they do not want you to have a tree fall on your house or your kids, on your car, or your neighbor's house or whatever, just because you can't immediately afford to take the tree down. Some things are vitally important. Chad knows that. So right now they have financing plans for tree takedown. So you can have the peace of mind of having the tree down and also the peace of mind of not having to pay the total right away. So thank you, Chad, for helping out all my people and including me to get our trees taken down in due order, but not without it taking too much out of our wallets at one time. All right, speaking, Hans'sTree.com is the website. Speaking of taking things out of your wallet, well, the grocery prices and Bidenomics is absolutely doing that. Inflation is at an untenable level right now, and it's hurting people. Because of that, and because of inflation, the proposed merger between the two super giants in the grocery industry has now been taken to court because the FTC is afraid it's going to represent a monopoly and increase prices even more. So you'll notice how CBS News covers this story, but inexplicably covers the story without ever mentioning Bidenomics, without ever mentioning the connection of the higher prices at the grocers, which is connected inextricably then to the reason why these two are being taken to court when they're trying to merge. They never connected to Kamala Harris and never connected to Joe Biden, never connected to Bidenomics at all. I mean, this is Herculean, the way they pull this off. Here you go.
In U.S. history. The CEOs of two major chains testified today at a trial defending Kroger's nearly $25 billion purchase of Albertsons. Federal regulators are trying to block the deal, saying it could hurt shoppers. Here's CBS's Jolene Kent.
The prices you pay at the grocery store are now under scrutiny in federal court.
Yeah, but why aren't they under scrutiny by CBS News? Why is the price at the grocery store suddenly an issue when CBS News covers a court case that its foundational principle is based on high grocery prices and trying to avoid further high grocery prices? Why is this an issue in a court now, CBS News, instead of an issue every night on CBS News about the high price of groceries? I'm wondering about that.
Nothing has gone down. It's all going up.
Things that you used to buy, like eggs, it's just gotten really expensive.
Yeah, it's interesting how they didn't do these interviews with people before this because they didn't want anybody and didn't want to acknowledge the fact that people are having pain at the grocery store level, but they had to be dragged kicking and screaming into talking about it because this, of course, is a pretty major merger and a pretty major court case. And so now CBS News is talking about it. These people that were just interviewed by CBS News could actually be in a pro-Trump commercial. And yet CBS News is like, well, yeah, this is just a court case and those people are suffering and that's why they're concerned about the merger. I'm thinking, no, they're concerned about growth. Had they asked them, who do you blame for this? They wouldn't blame Albertsons and Kroger, and they wouldn't say that it's because of a proposed merger. They would blame the current administration, clearly, but that's not included in the story.
Today, the CEOs of grocery chains Kroger and Albertsons defended a proposed $25 billion merger under oath, saying the combined chains would be better positioned to compete with Walmart and Amazon.
Which is absolutely true. I mean, Walmart is taking a huge percentage of the receipts when it comes to people buying groceries. And so these two are thinking, well, if we just kind of merge and be powerhouses, we're not dividing our income, so to speak. We're actually merging our income, and it would make us better positioned to compete against these bigger guys. Sounds simple enough.
Kroger CEO Rodney McMullen promising in court the day that we merge is the day that we will begin lowering prices.
And that actually technically is achievable, because you have to admit when you merge resources, you automatically aren't having separate resources and spending just that much more money because you're separate. So if you merge, then you have a situation where you're cutting expenses as it is, because you're not two separate entities anymore. You're one, and it stands to reason that your costs of delivery and of operation go down. It's pretty simple.
Vowing that the combined company would invest $1 billion to lower prices if the merger goes through. The Federal Trade Commission has sued to halt this merger, alleging it would raise prices by reducing competition in some areas of the country.
Yeah, and the reason why there is a bigger fear now of raised prices is because prices are already too high. Why are prices already too high? Because of Bidenomics. So the FTC itself, in trying to get in the middle of this merger, is actually doing some dirty work in hiding the true effects of Bidenomics and trying to act like this merger is really what is going to result in high prices that are already high. So CBS, of course, isn't occurring to CBS at all, or actually I think it does occur to them, but they're really trying hard to avoid talking about the administration's policies.
Is that an accurate argument?
I'm not convinced of that argument. So if they're somehow able to combine their stores, some of those cost savings through lower wholesale prices could be passed on to consumers.
The two chains combined operate about 5,000 stores. Currently, Walmart dominates the grocery market by dollars spent, as shoppers have faced stubborn inflation since the pandemic.
Did you hear that? Shoppers have faced stubborn inflation since the pandemic. By the way, the insinuation is that the pandemic is what kicked in inflation, which is absolutely not true. Because how can you, as Kamala Harris and Joe Biden have, how can you argue that your economy, your jobs are stronger since the pandemic, and at the same time say that prices are higher because of the pandemic? Like the pandemic only lingers as it relates to grocery prices, but not as it relates to jobs? And how do you take credit for the job increase if you're not taking blame for the price increases since the pandemic? It doesn't make any sense.
Since 2019, according to the CBS Money Watch price tracker, a dozen eggs more than doubled. Bread jumped 54% and chicken 33%.
And you also notice how they decided to kind of back time their timing on when the prices started to go up to 2019. Why didn't they show us, hey, since 2020, here's how the prices have gone up? Because then it would be tied to the Biden-Harris administration. So, man, you really got to pay attention to this stuff to just see the flim-flammery and the shell game that is played by the news media in a rash effort to protect the Biden administration from any kind of blame for our current economy, and certainly any kind of blame for the fact that the FTC is now getting involved in this merger. But yeah, it's subtle, but that's what people who are evil operate in, subtleties. They just think that you're not going to see it, and certain people do. I know I did. On the Allman Report on NewsTalkSTL. So, Ethan, thanks a ton for your help. You all, thank you so much for listening to the show here on this beautiful Thursday evening. Have a good one.